There's a specific kind of silence that happens when someone asks you what you do. You paint, you write, you photograph things that most people walk past without looking at. You spend hours, real hours, hours you could have used for something else, making something that didn't exist before. And when someone asks you what you do, something in you hesitates. You list the job that pays you. You mention the art almost as a footnote. Oh, and I also paint a little, like it's a hobby you're slightly embarrassed about, like it doesn't count unless someone has decided it counts. This isn't a confidence problem. I want to say that clearly because I think most advice around this topic treats it like one. Like you just need to stand in front of a mirror and say, I am an artist with enough conviction until the feeling catches up. That's not what's happening here. What's happening is something more structural, something that was built into you long before you had a name for it. Before we move forward, please like, subscribe, donate, and join Lightbulb Letters. It really helps me, a writer, get across to lovely artists like yourselves. Let's start with the obvious question nobody actually answers. What qualifies someone to be an artist? If you ask most people, and I mean most people, not just non-artists, there's an invisible checklist. You need to be making money from it, or you need to have been formally trained, or you need some external body of recognition, a gallery, a publisher, an award, a commission, to have looked at your work and said, yes, this counts. Without that, you're a hobbyist, a person who makes things, an enthusiast, not the real thing. And here's what's interesting about that checklist. It has almost nothing to do with the act of making. Think about that. The one thing that would definitively make you an artist, the act of creating, doesn't even appear on the list. What appears on the list is validation. External validation specifically, which means we've collectively agreed that being an artist is not about what you do. It's about what other people think of what you do. And until enough people with the right credentials have weighed in, you're supposed to keep your head down and keep the title in your pocket. This is the trap, and it's not accidental. There's a long history behind the idea that creative work only has value when it's been authenticated by someone outside of it, when it's been bought or collected or credentialed. Before capitalism reorganized the relationship between art and commerce, making was something people simply did, embedded in daily life, in ritual, in community. There wasn't a separate category called artist that you had to earn entry into. There was just making. There was just the thing being made. What we have now is different. Now, making is separated from living. It gets sorted into productive or non-productive, professional or amateur, real or not quite. And the people doing the sorting are almost never the makers themselves. So when you hesitate to call yourself an artist, you're not being modest. You're being obedient. You've absorbed a set of rules that were written by other people for other purposes, and you're applying them to yourself with extraordinary faithfulness. You've outsourced the question of who you are to a system that was never designed to answer it honestly. But there's another layer underneath this one, because even knowing all of that, even agreeing with everything I've just said, the hesitation doesn't go away, and that's what we're sitting with. Why? Because calling yourself an artist isn't just a label, it's a claim. And claims can be contested. Claims can be proven wrong. If you call yourself an artist and someone looks at your work and decides it doesn't measure up, that rejection is much harder to absorb than if you'd never made the claim at all. The hesitation is protective. It keeps you safe from a very specific kind of failure. The failure of having wanted something and not been enough for it. This is the part nobody talks about in the productivity content, the hustle content, the just start making things content. Because when people tell you to just own the title, they're glossing over the fact that owning the title means risking the loss of it. It means being visible enough to be evaluated. It means standing behind your work in a way that makes you accountable to it. And for a lot of artists, the work is so close to the center of who they are, so intimate, so much a language for the parts of them that don't translate into ordinary speech, that having it dismissed would feel like a dismissal of the self, not of a product, not of a skill set, of the self. That's not irrational. That's actually a pretty logical response to a real vulnerability. The question is whether the protection is worth what it costs, because what it costs is the integration, the ability to move through your life without a split running through the middle of it, the life you live and the person you actually are. And that split is exhausting in a way that's hard to name. It's the exhaustion of perpetually staging yourself for consumption while keeping the real work hidden, of treating the most alive parts of yourself as a liability, of never quite being at home in your own story. Here's what I think is actually true. You don't call yourself an artist because you're waiting for permission, and the permission isn't coming from outside. It was never going to come from outside. The people who call themselves artists without flinching aren't people who received external validation and finally felt allowed. They're people who stopped waiting, not because they became fearless, but because they decided the split was more painful than the risk. That's the actual shift, not confidence, not a certainty about quality, just a decision about which pain is more livable. And I think it's worth naming what that decision actually requires of you, because it's not small. It requires you to grieve the version of legitimacy you were chasing, the version where someone important finally looked at your work and said yes. That version of being an artist felt safe because the responsibility was distributed. Someone else confirmed it. Someone else held the weight of the verdict. Letting go of that model means accepting that the verdict was always yours to give. That's not a relief at first. It feels more like exposure. But it's also the only version of artistic identity that doesn't have an expiration date on it, contingent on whoever's approving things this season. I want to offer you something concrete, not as a feel-good instruction, but as a genuine reframe. The word artist doesn't describe your level. It doesn't describe your income, your credentials, your recognition, or your place in any hierarchy. It describes your relationship to making. If you are in a relationship with making, if it matters to you, if it pulls at you, if you return to it, even when it's difficult, even when it costs you something, then it's already the primary relationship in your creative life. And a word exists for people who have that relationship. The word is artist. Not aspiring artist, not amateur artist, not part-time or unofficial or provisional artist, artist. The hesitation you feel about saying it out loud isn't evidence that the word doesn't apply. It's evidence that the word matters to you. You don't hesitate over things that don't matter. The hesitation is, if anything, proof of how seriously you take it. And maybe that's where I leave you. Not with an instruction to go introduce yourself differently at parties, not with a journaling prompt or an affirmation, just with this: the thing you keep making, in whatever stolen hours you have, in whatever corner of your life you've managed to protect, that thing is not a footnote. It's not a hobby you haven't promoted yet. It is the primary document of your interior life. Treat it like one. And when someone asks you what you do, let yourself say the real answer.